The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac as Captain Andre Wilson completed his flight checks. The small regional airport was quiet this Tuesday morning, just how he liked it. At 42, with salt and pepper beginning to dust his temples, Andre had been flying for more than 15 years. He loved the peaceful routine of aviation, the methodical checks, and the freedom of the skies. Andre adjusted his pilot's cap and straightened his uniform jacket, taking a moment to admire the sleek private jet that gleamed in the morning light. The aircraft wasn't just his responsibility, it was his pride and joy. Every curve of its aerodynamic design represented years of hard work, dedication, and a dream that had seemed impossible when he was a boy growing up in a neighborhood where planes only existed as distant specks overhead. Another smooth landing, he murmured to himself, completing the final entries in his flight log. His passengers, 3 business executives from the East Coast, had already departed in a waiting car, leaving Andre to complete the post-flight procedures before heading to the hotel for a much-needed rest. The sound of heavy footsteps on the tarmac caught his attention. An airport security officer was approaching, walking with the stiff-backed confidence of someone who enjoyed the authority his uniform provided. Andre noticed immediately that the officer's hand rested near his holstered weapon, an unusual posture for a routine check at a private airfield. "Morning, officer," Andre called out, offering a friendly nod as he closed his logbook. "Beautiful day for flying." The officer, whose name badge read P. Reynolds, didn't return the smile. His eyes narrowed as they swept over Andre, then the luxury aircraft behind him. "ID and flight clearance," Reynolds demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut through the ambient noise of the distant runway. "Of course," Andre replied, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the officer's tone. He reached slowly into his breast pocket, conscious of how the officer tensed at his movement. "Here's my pilot's license, credentials, and our flight plan." Everything was cleared with tower control before landing. Reynolds barely glanced at the documents before looking back at Andre with undisguised suspicion. "This your plane?" Andre smiled patiently. "I'm the captain, yes. I flew it here from—" "That's not what I asked," Reynolds cut in. "I asked if this is your plane." "Ownership papers?" Andre felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. The same tension that appeared whenever someone looked at his skin first and his credentials second. "The ownership documents are in the aircraft's file box. I'd be happy to show you those as well, though they're not typically required for routine ramp checks." 2 ground crew members had paused their work nearby, watching the interaction with uneasy expressions. Andre gave them a small reassuring wave, not wanting to escalate the situation. Reynolds spoke into his radio, his eyes never leaving Andre. "I need a second unit at the private hangar area. Got a situation with an unverified pilot and aircraft." "Officer," Andre said calmly, "there seems to be some confusion. I've been flying into this airport for years. My clearance and documentation are all in order, as you can see. We've had reports of unauthorized aircraft in this airspace," Reynolds replied, though his radio had been silent about any such alerts. "You'll need to come with me while we verify your identity and authority to operate this vehicle." A chill ran down Andre's spine that had nothing to do with the morning breeze. He'd experienced this before. The sudden questioning of his presence, the immediate suspicion, the assumption that he didn't belong in the cockpit of a luxury aircraft. But he'd learned long ago that showing frustration only made these situations worse. "I understand you're doing your job," Andre said, his voice level and professional, "but I assure you everything is in order. You can confirm with air traffic control that our arrival was scheduled and authorized." Reynolds stepped closer, invading Andre's personal space. "Listen, buddy, I don't know how you got hold of this uniform or this paperwork, but something doesn't add up. Real pilots don't usually look like—" He stopped himself. But the implication hung in the air between them. By now, a small crowd had gathered at a distance, more ground crew, a fueling technician, and a pair of administrative staff from the terminal. Andre could feel their eyes on him, witnessing his humiliation. His face burned, but he kept his expression neutral. "Officer Reynolds," he said, reading the full name from the badge. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor, please. I believe there's been a misunderstanding." "Oh, you'll get to talk to plenty of people," Reynolds said with a smirk. He gestured toward the terminal building. "Let's go. And don't try anything funny." The walk across the tarmac felt endless. Andre was acutely aware of every step, every pair of eyes following their progress. the officer walking slightly behind him as if he were escorting a criminal. His pilot's uniform, usually a source of pride, now felt like a costume that, in Reynolds' eyes, he had no right to wear. Inside the small security office, Reynolds directed Andre to a hard plastic chair in the corner. The room was sparse, a metal desk, a computer, filing cabinets, and a window overlooking the runway where Andre's jet sat gleaming in the sun. Phone. "Please," Reynolds said, holding out his hand. Andre hesitated. "Am I being detained, officer?" "We're conducting an investigation. Your phone, please, and any other communication devices." Reluctantly, Andre handed over his personal phone and his company device. Reynolds placed them on the desk, just out of reach. "Now, let's start from the beginning," Reynolds said, settling into the chair behind the desk. "Who are you really, and how did you come to be in possession of this aircraft?" "As I've already told you, I'm Captain Andre Wilson. I've been a licensed commercial pilot for 15 years, with over 10,000 flight hours. The jet is registered to Skypath Aviation, where I'm employed as a senior pilot. We arrived this morning from Philadelphia with 3 passengers who had business in town." Reynolds typed something into the computer, his expression skeptical. "And these passengers can vouch for you?" "Absolutely. Their contact information should be in our passenger manifest, which was filed with our flight plan." "Convenient that they've already left, isn't it?" Reynolds remarked. Andre took a deep breath. "Officer, with all due respect, what exactly am I being accused of?" "My documentation is in order. The aircraft's papers are in order. Our flight plan was approved." "What is the actual issue here?" Reynolds leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The issue is that we've had reports of drug trafficking through private aircraft in this region. And suddenly here you are with a multi-million-dollar jet and paperwork that could easily be falsified." Andre blinked in disbelief. "You think I'm trafficking drugs? In a company jet with high-profile business clients aboard? That's—" He stopped himself from saying what he really thought. "That's a very serious accusation." "Not an accusation," Reynolds corrected with a thin smile. "Just an investigation. Standard procedure." There was nothing standard about this, and they both knew it. Andre glanced at his watches. He had been detained for nearly 40 minutes now. "I'd like to make a phone call," Andre said firmly. Reynolds chuckled. "This isn't a police station, pal. You're not entitled to a phone call. Actually, as a certified pilot whose credentials are being questioned, FAA regulations allow me to contact both my employer and legal representation if my identity or authority to fly is being challenged," Andre stated, recalling the aviation rights workshop he'd attended last year. "And if I'm not under arrest, you have no right to hold my personal property." Reynolds' smile faded. He seemed thrown by Andre's knowledge of his rights. After a moment of silence, he pushed the company phone, but not the personal one, back across the desk. "One call," he said grudgingly. "And I'll be listening to every word." Andre picked up the phone with steady hands despite the anger and humiliation churning inside him. He dialed a number from memory and waited, feeling Reynolds' eyes boring into him. The phone rang twice before a crisp voice answered. "This is Captain Wilson," Andre said calmly. "I need you to connect me with Ms. Chen immediately. There's been an incident at Westridge Regional." As he waited to be transferred, Andre caught a glimpse of his reflection in the office window, a professional in uniform, being treated like a criminal. But behind that reflection, he could also see his aircraft on the tarmac, the same aircraft that had carried him beyond the limited expectations others had set for him his entire life. Reynolds watched with growing uncertainty as Andre spoke into the phone, his demeanor unchanged despite the circumstances. Something about the pilot's confidence was beginning to make the officer uneasy. What Reynolds didn't know, what he couldn't have guessed from his hasty judgments, was exactly who he had decided to detain this quiet Tuesday morning. And in approximately 20 minutes, that oversight would become devastatingly clear to everyone involved. The small security office felt even smaller as the minutes ticked by. Andre sat with his back straight, hands folded in his lap, watching Officer Reynolds pretend to be busy at the computer. The rhythmic tapping of keys filled the uncomfortable silence, but Andre could tell Reynolds was simply trying to look occupied while they waited. "Your supervisor should be here any minute now," Andre said calmly, glancing at his watch. Reynolds snorted without looking up. "I wouldn't count on it. Chief's got better things to do than rush over for something like this." "I wasn't referring to your chief," Andre replied. Something in his tone made Reynolds pause and look up. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across the officer's face before he masked it with another scowl. "Look," Reynolds said, leaning forward, "we can make this easy. Just tell me who really owns the plane, who you're working for, and maybe we can work something out." Andre raised an eyebrow. "Work something out? You know what I mean. People make mistakes, get caught up with the wrong crowd, especially people from certain backgrounds." Reynolds shrugged. "I'm willing to listen if you want to cooperate." The implication hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Andre felt a flash of anger but kept his expression neutral. He'd dealt with men like Reynolds his entire career, men who couldn't imagine that he belonged in a cockpit, who assumed he must be involved in something illegal because how else could a black man fly a private jet? "Officer Reynolds," Andre said carefully, "I think we should wait for the appropriate parties to arrive before continuing this conversation." Reynolds leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You know, attitude like that makes me think you've got something to hide. Requesting proper procedure isn't attitude, officer. It's my right." Before Reynolds could respond, his radio crackled to life. "Reynolds, this is dispatch. We've got some visitors at the main entrance asking for you. They say it's regarding the pilot detention. What's your status?" Reynolds grabbed the radio. "Tell them to wait. I'm still questioning the suspect." "Negative, Reynolds. They've got FAA credentials and—" The dispatcher's voice dropped to a whisper, though still audible. "One of them is from the aviation company. They seem pretty high up." Andre couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his lips. Reynolds caught it and narrowed his eyes. "Who exactly did you call?" he demanded, rising from his chair. "As I mentioned, I called my office," Andre replied evenly. "Standard protocol when a pilot is detained without cause." Reynolds' face darkened. "Stay put. Don't touch anything." He headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "This doesn't change anything. If you're running something illegal through my airport, I will find out." "Your airport?" Andre asked quietly. Reynolds didn't answer, just slammed the door behind him. Through the small window in the office, Andre watched him stride across the terminal, his back stiff with indignation. Alone in the office, Andre finally allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. He closed his eyes and took several deep breaths. Despite his years of experience, despite his position, despite everything he had accomplished, moments like these never got easier. The automatic suspicion, the instant assumption of guilt, it wore on the soul, one encounter at a time. He opened his eyes and looked around the cramped security office. His pilot's license and credentials lay scattered across Reynolds' desk, treated with none of the respect they deserved. Each document represented years of study, thousands of hours in the air, and countless barriers overcome. Yet to Reynolds, they were just papers that must surely be forgeries. The sound of multiple footsteps approaching pulled Andre from his thoughts. He straightened his uniform jacket just as the door swung open. Reynolds entered first, his face now considerably paler than when he'd left. Behind him came three people: a tall woman in a crisp FAA uniform, a man in a business suit who Andre recognized as the airport director, and, most importantly, a stern-faced woman in her early 50s whose tailored pantsuit and commanding presence made Reynolds seem to shrink just by standing near her. "Captain Wilson," the woman in the pantsuit said, her voice sharp with controlled anger, "I apologize for the delay in responding to your call. I came as soon as Miss Chen reached me." Andre stood. "No apology necessary, Ms. Patel. Thank you for coming personally." Reynolds looked between them, confusion evident on his face. "You two know each other?" Ms. Patel turned to Reynolds, her expression icier than a high-altitude jet stream. "Officer Reynolds, I'm Divya Patel, Chief Operating Officer of Skypath Aviation. Captain Wilson is not only one of our senior pilots, he is also—" "Let's address the immediate situation first," Andre interrupted gently. "My credentials and personal property?" The FAA representative stepped forward. "Officer Reynolds, I've reviewed Captain Wilson's documentation. Everything is in order. His pilot's license is current, his medical certification is up to date, and the flight plan was properly filed and approved. There is absolutely no reason for him to be detained." Reynolds sputtered. "But the aircraft, we've had reports—" "What reports exactly?" the airport director asked, frowning. "I've checked with air traffic control. There have been no alerts about unauthorized aircraft or suspicious flight patterns. Nothing in our security briefings either." "It was an anonymous tip," Reynolds muttered, not meeting anyone's eyes. "I see," Ms. Patel said. her voice dangerously soft. And did this anonymous tip specify anything beyond the fact that the pilot was black? Reynolds' head snapped up. I never said anything about— You didn't have to, Andre said quietly. It was clear in every question, every assumption, every look. The room fell silent. The airport director looked embarrassed, the FAA representative angry, and Ms. Patel like she was calculating exactly how many ways she could make Officer Reynolds regret this day. I believe we're done here, Ms. Patel finally said. Captain Wilson, your belongings? Reynolds grudgingly gathered Andre's license, credentials, phones, and other items from his desk. As he handed them over, he couldn't quite meet Andre's eyes. Officer Reynolds, the airport director said firmly, we'll need to discuss this incident in detail. My office, after we've seen Captain Wilson and Ms. Patel out. Reynolds nodded stiffly. As they left the security office, Andre felt the weight of stares from across the terminal. News had spread quickly. Airport staff, passengers, and other security personnel watched as the small group made their way toward the exit, their expressions ranging from curiosity to embarrassment to outright dismay. Outside, the bright sunlight felt like a reprieve after the stuffiness of the security office. Andre took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling some of the tension leave his shoulders. Captain, I cannot apologize enough for this, the airport director said, running a hand through his thinning hair. This is not how we train our security personnel to behave. I assure you there will be consequences. I appreciate that, Andre replied, though I'm more interested in prevention than punishment. Perhaps this could be an opportunity to review training procedures. The FAA representative nodded approvingly. A constructive approach, Captain. We'd be happy to provide additional resources for sensitivity training. Ms. Patel checked her watch. We can discuss next steps later. Right now, I need to speak with Captain Wilson privately. She gave the others a polite but dismissive nod, effectively ending the conversation. As they walked toward the private aviation area of the airport, Andre felt Ms. Patel's concerned glance. Are you all right? She asked once they were out of earshot. I'm fine, Andre said automatically, then sighed. No, that's not entirely true, but I will be. This is exactly why we implemented the emergency protocol, Ms. Patel said, anger still evident in her voice. Third incident this year, though certainly the most egregious. They stopped at the edge of the tarmac, the sleek private jet still sitting where Andre had left it. From this distance, the aircraft looked peaceful, unbothered by the human drama that had unfolded around it. Should I cancel tomorrow's flight? Ms. Patel asked. We can arrange for another pilot if you'd prefer to take some time. Andre shook his head firmly. No, I'll fly as scheduled. He looked out at the jet, his jet, a symbol of everything he had worked for. I won't let him ground me, not even for a day. Ms. Patel nodded, understanding in her eyes. In that case, there's something else we need to discuss. She pulled out her tablet and pulled up a document. The board meeting was moved up. They're expecting an answer about the regional expansion, particularly regarding this airport as a potential hub. Andre looked back toward the terminal building, where Officer Reynolds was probably being reprimanded by the airport director. A slow, thoughtful smile spread across his face. You know, he said, I think I've just gained some valuable insight into the operational culture here. The board will be very interested in my first-hand experience. Ms. Patel's eyebrow arched. I imagine they will. What? Officer Reynolds didn't know what he couldn't have guessed. When he decided to detain a black pilot, based on nothing but his own prejudice, was that he hadn't just picked on any pilot. The man he had humiliated, whose credentials he had questioned, whose very right to be in the cockpit he had challenged, was not only a senior pilot. Andre Wilson was the owner and CEO of Skypath Aviation, the company currently considering whether to invest $50 million in expanding operations at this very airport. And thanks to Officer Reynolds, Andre now had serious doubts about whether this was the right place for his company's future. As they walked toward the waiting CA. Andre glanced back one last time at the terminal building and wondered if Officer Reynolds had any idea what his actions had just cost this airport and himself. The news spread through Westridge Regional Airport like wildfire. By lunchtime, everyone from the baggage handlers to the gift shop clerks was talking about how Officer Reynolds had detained the CEO of Skypath Aviation. The story grew with each retelling, details embellished. But the core truth remained unchanged. Reynolds had made a career-ending mistake. Andre sat in the hotel restaurant, picking at his club sandwich while Ms. Patel reviewed emails on her tablet. They had barely spoken during the short drive from the airport, both processing the morning's events in their own way. "The board wants an emergency video call at 3, Ms. Patel said finally, setting down her tablet. "They've already heard rumors about what happened," Andre sighed. "News travels fast. One of the ground crew posted about it. Didn't name names, but described enough that people figured it out." She studied his face. "You're not eating." "Not hungry," Andre replied, pushing his plate away. The adrenaline that had kept him steady during the confrontation was fading, leaving behind a familiar hollowness. "What's Reynolds' status?" "Suspended pending investigation, according to my contact at the airport authority." Ms. Patel took a sip of her iced tea. "The airport director is beside himself. He's already sent 3 emails requesting a meeting with you." Andre nodded absently, his mind elsewhere. He kept replaying the moment when Reynolds first approached him, trying to pinpoint exactly when the officer decided he didn't belong there. Was it the first glance? The second? Or was the decision made before Reynolds even saw his face, based solely on the unexpected sight of a black man in a pilot's uniform standing beside a luxury aircraft? "You know what bothers me most?" Andre said suddenly. "He never even considered that I might actually be the pilot. Not for 1 second. In his mind, there was no possibility that someone who looks like me could be qualified to fly that plane." Ms. Patel reached across the table and briefly squeezed his hand. It was a rare gesture from the normally reserved executive. "I know, and it's unacceptable." Andre's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's from Ty. He says the local news is trying to reach me for comment." "How did they find out so quickly? Do you want me to handle it?" Ms. Patel offered. Andre considered for a moment, then shook his head. "No, this needs to come from me, but not yet. I need to think about how we approach this." His phone buzzed again, this time with an incoming call. The screen displayed Airport Director Collins. After a moment's hesitation, Andre answered and put the call on speaker. "This is Andre Wilson, Captain Wilson. Thank you for taking my call." The director's voice was strained with forced pleasantry. "I was hoping we could meet this afternoon to discuss this morning's unfortunate incident." Andre exchanged glances with Ms. Patel before responding. "I appreciate the offer, Director Collins, but I have a board meeting at 3. Perhaps tomorrow." Of course. Tomorrow would be fine." There was an awkward pause. "Captain Wilson, I want to personally assure you that Officer Reynolds' actions do not reflect the values of Westridge Regional Airport. We pride ourselves on being a welcoming facility for all aviators." "I understand," Andre replied evenly. "However, I'm curious. What policies do you have in place to prevent this type of incident? What training do your security personnel receive regarding potential bias?" The director's hesitation told Andre everything he needed to know. "Well, we follow standard TSA guidelines for security personnel, and of course we have a non-discrimination policy that all employees sign, but no specific training addressing implicit bias or racial profiling." Another telling pause. "We're actually in the process of developing such a program." "I see," Andre said. "Well, Director Collins, I look forward to hearing more about this developing program when we meet tomorrow. Shall we say 10 o'clock? After confirming the meeting time and ending the call, Andre looked at Ms. Patel, who was trying to suppress a smile. "You're going to make him sweat for the next 24 hours, aren't you?" she asked. "It's the least I can do," Andre replied, the first genuine smile of the day crossing his face. Now he'll spend all night scrambling to put together a diversity training proposal that should have existed years ago. Their moment of levity was interrupted by another buzz from Andre's phone. This time it was a news alert. He opened it and his smile faded. "Well, it's officially hit the news cycle," he said, turning the phone so Ms. Patel could see the headline, "Airport Security Officer Detains Aviation CEO in Alleged Racial Profiling Incident." Ms. Patel quickly scanned the article. "They don't have many details yet, but they're already reaching out to civil rights organizations for comment. This is going to blow up quickly." Andre nodded, suddenly feeling very tired. "We need to get ahead of this. Draft a company statement, something measured but firm. Emphasize that we're working with the airport to address the underlying issues rather than just punishing the individual." "Are you sure?" "You have every right to demand consequences for Reynolds, Andre sat back in his chair, considering. Reynolds deserves consequences, yes. But firing one officer won't change the system that trained and empowered him. If anything good comes from this humiliating experience, I want it to be meaningful change, not just a sacrificial firing to appease public outrage. Ms. Patel studied him for a long moment before nodding. I've always admired that about you, Andre. Even when you have every right to be angry, you think bigger. Don't give me too much credit, Andre replied with a wry smile. Part of me would love to see Reynolds packing up his desk today. Before Ms. Patel could respond, Andre's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Ty Johnson, his head of public relations. Ty, you're on speaker with me and Ms. Patel, Andre said after answering. Boss, we've got a situation developing, Ty said, his voice tense. Officer Reynolds just gave an interview to a local reporter trying to defend himself. It's not good. Andre felt his stomach tighten. What did he say? He claimed he was just following protocol for suspicious aircraft, but then he added, and I'm quoting here, I had no way of knowing who he was. He didn't look like any airline executive I've ever seen. The silence that followed was deafening. Andre closed his eyes, trying to control his breathing. He just made it so much worse, Ms. Patel finally said. It gets worse, Ty continued. Social media is blowing up. Someone leaked security footage from the terminal showing Reynolds escorting you to the security office. The hashtag #NarFlyingWhileBlack is trending locally and starting to pick up nationally. Andre opened his eyes. Where are we with the board statement? Draft is ready for your approval. They want to issue it before the emergency meeting. Send it to Ms. Patel. We'll review it now. Andre paused, thinking quickly. Also contact Director Collins. Tell him I'd like to move our meeting up to this evening if possible. And Ty, reach out to Professor Washington at the State University. See if she's available to consult on developing a training program. After ending the call, Andre looked at Ms. Patel, who was watching him with a mixture of concern and admiration. You're already thinking about solutions, she observed. Andre nodded. The spotlight is on us now, whether we want it or not. We can use it to drive real change, or we can let it become just another outrage cycle that fades after a few days. I prefer the former. Ms. Patel's tablet pinged with an incoming email. That's the board statement, she said, opening the document. She read it silently, then passed the tablet to Andre. The statement was strong but measured, acknowledging the incident without inflaming tensions, expressing disappointment rather than outrage, and most importantly, focusing on the opportunity for systemic improvement rather than individual punishment. It's good, Andre said, handing back the tablet. Approve it. As Ms. Patel sent the approval, Andre's phone lit up with another call. This time it was the local NNOACP chapter president. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of calls, messages, and planning. By the time they headed back to the airport for the board's video conference, Andre had spoken with civil rights leaders, aviation industry representatives, and even the mayor, who was deeply concerned about how this incident might affect the city's reputation and the airport's expansion plans. The small conference room at the airport executive offices felt charged with tension when Andre and Ms. Patel entered. Director Collins greeted them with nervous enthusiasm, obviously relieved that Andre had agreed to meet earlier than planned. We've set everything up for your board call, he said, gesturing to the video conferencing system. And afterward, I'd be honored if you'd meet with our security team leadership. They've prepared some initial thoughts on improving our training protocols. Andre nodded politely but said little as they prepared for the call. When the large screen flickered to life, revealing the faces of Skypath Aviation's board members, he straightened his shoulders and put on the confident expression he had perfected over years of navigating rooms where he was often the only blah. Sacred person present, good afternoon, everyone, he began. I appreciate you making time for this unscheduled meeting. As you've likely heard, there was an incident at Westridge Regional Airport this morning that requires our attention. He recounted the events clearly and factually, without emotional embellishment but also without minimizing the discrimination he had faced. The board members' expressions ranged from shock to anger to embarrassment. When he finished, the board chair spoke. Andre, first let me say how deeply sorry I am that you experienced this. It's absolutely unacceptable. What do you need from us right now? Andre took a deep breath. This was the moment to set the course for what would happen next. I need your support for 2 initiatives, he said firmly. First, I want to use this incident to partner with regional airports on developing comprehensive bias training for all security personnel. SkyPath will help fund and develop the program. The board members nodded in agreement. Second, Andre continued, I want to postpone our decision on the West Ridge expansion. Not cancel it, but postpone it until we can properly evaluate whether this airport truly aligns with our company values. He could see Director Collins stiffen in his peripheral vision, but kept his focus on the board members who were considering his words. Both reasonable requests. The chair finally said, I think I speak for all of us when I say you have our full support. As the meeting continued, Andre felt some of the day's weight lifting from his shoulders. What had begun as a humiliating experience was transforming into an opportunity, not just for him or for SkyPath Aviation, but for every pilot who didn't fit someone else's narrow expectation of what a pilot should look like. The painful truth was that he couldn't change Officer Reynolds' heart or mind with a single encounter. But by leveraging his position in this moment of attention, he might be able to change the system that had empowered Reynolds' prejudice. And in the long run, that would make a far greater difference than one officer's suspension ever could. 3 days after the incident, Andre sat in his office at SkyPath headquarters, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the cloudy sky. Rain tapped against the glass, matching his contemplative mood. On his desk, newspapers and printouts of online articles told the story of how quickly the incident had captured public attention. Aviation CEO, racially profiled at regional airport, Black executive detained while standing next to his own plane. Airport officer suspended after profiling incident. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Ty, his PR director, stood in the doorway, tablet in hand. Got a minute, boss? Andre gestured to the chair across from his desk. What's the latest? Ty sat down, swiping through screens on his tablet. The story's gone national. You've got interview requests from major networks, aviation magazines, business journals. Everyone wants your take. He looked up. How do you want to handle it? Andre drummed his fingers on the desk. For 3 days, he'd declined all interview requests, letting the company's official statement speak for itself. But the story had taken on a life of its own. Without his voice, others were shaping the narrative. Select one. Someone thoughtful, not looking for sensationalism. I'll do a single in-depth interview, but I want final approval on the edit. Ty nodded, making notes. There's something else. Officer Reynolds released another statement through his union representative. He passed the tablet to Andre, who read the statement with growing disbelief. While I regret any misunderstanding, I was simply following security protocols. At no point did Captain Wilson identify himself as the company owner. If he had, the situation would have been resolved immediately. Andre set the tablet down, shaking his head. He still doesn't get it, does he? Apparently not, Ty agreed. His union is pushing back hard against the suspension, claiming he's being scapegoated for political correctness. Did he expect me to wear a sign saying CEO around my neck? Andre asked, not hiding his frustration. The issue wasn't that he didn't recognize me as the owner. The issue was that he couldn't believe I was even the pilot. The phone on his desk buzzed. His assistant's voice came through the speaker. Mr. Wilson, Director Collins from West Ridge Airport is on line 1. Again. Andre and Ty exchanged knowing looks. The airport director had been calling daily, each message more desperate than the last. I'll take it, Andre said. He picked up the receiver. Director Collins, good morning. Captain Wilson, thank you for taking my call. The relief in the director's voice was palpable. I was hoping we could discuss the draft proposal we sent over yesterday. We've incorporated all of your team's suggestions for the training program. Yes, Ms. Patel forwarded it to me. The revisions look promising. Excellent, excellent. Collins paused. And regarding the other matter, the expansion decision, Andre had been expecting this. The airport stood to gain millions from SkyPath's planned regional hub. The possibility of losing that deal was clearly keeping Collins up at night. The board is still evaluating all options, Director. We're committed to making the right decision, not just the expedient one. Of course. No, Collins sounded deflated. By the way, Officer Reynolds has requested a meeting with you. His union representative advised against it, but he's quite insistent. This caught Andre by surprise. Did he say why? He claims he wants to apologize in person. I told him I'd pass along the request, but it's entirely your decision whether to grant it. After ending the call, Andre leaned back in his chair, considering this unexpected development. "You're not actually thinking of meeting him?" Ty asked incredulously. "I'm not sure yet," Andre admitted. "Part of me says there's nothing to gain. Another part wonders if there's an opportunity here." Before Ty could respond, Andre's phone buzzed again. This time it was Ms. Patel. "You need to see this," she said without preamble. "Turning on your office TV now." The wall-mounted screen flickered to life, showing a news program. The headline at the bottom read, "Exclusive. Security footage shows aviation CEO detention." Andre and Ty watched in stunned silence as grainy security camera footage played, showing Andre being escorted across the terminal by Officer Reynolds. The camera angle clearly captured Reynolds' aggressive posture and Andre's calm dignity. Most damning was the moment when Reynolds unnecessarily grabbed Andre's arm while directing him into the security office. "Who released this?" Andre asked quietly when the clip ended. "Unknown source," Ms. Patel replied. "But it's being picked up everywhere. Social media is exploding." Andre closed his eyes briefly. The footage made the incident look even worse than it had felt in the moment. Reynolds' body language screamed suspicion and contempt. "Reynolds is finished," Ty said flatly. "No way the airport can keep him after this." Andre wasn't so sure. He'd seen how these situations played out before. Outrage, promises, then gradual forgetting until the next incident. Nothing really changing. "Ty, set up the interview for tomorrow." Ms. Patel called Director Collins back. "Tell him I'll meet with Reynolds, but I have conditions." After ending both calls, Andre turned to the rain-streaked window again. The decision crystallizing in his mind wasn't the one most people would expect. It certainly wasn't what the social media outrage machine would demand, but it felt right. The following day, Andre arrived at Westridge Airport's administrative offices for what promised to be an unusual meeting. He'd chosen to wear his pilot's uniform rather than a business suit, a deliberate statement about his dual identity as both pilot and executive. Director Collins greeted him with nervous energy, ushering him into a conference room where Professor Washington from the State University was already seated. The diversity training expert had agreed to join the meeting at Andre's request. "Officer Reynolds will be here shortly," Collins said, checking his watch. His union representative wanted to attend, but Reynolds declined. Andre nodded. "That's his choice. As I mentioned to Ms. Patel, I'll only speak with him alone." "Of course. We've respected all your conditions." Collins hesitated. "Mr. Wilson, I want you to know that the airport board has unanimously approved the comprehensive training program you proposed. Implementation begins next week." "That's good to hear," Andre replied, "though I wish it hadn't taken this incident to make it happen." A knock at the door interrupted them. Collins opened it to reveal Officer Reynolds, looking distinctly uncomfortable in civilian clothes rather than his uniform. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Andre in his pilot's uniform. "Officer Reynolds," Collins said stiffly, "as requested, Captain Wilson has agreed to meet with you. Professor Washington will remain as a neutral observer, but I'll leave you to your conversation." As Collins left, closing the door behind him, an awkward silence filled the room. Reynolds stood just inside the doorway, clearly uncertain about how to begin. Andre decided to make it easier for him. "Please sit down." Reynolds took a seat across from Andre, his posture rigid. Up close, Andre could see the toll the last few days had taken on the officer. Dark circles under bloodshot eyes, a slight tremor in his hands. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Reynolds finally said, his voice rougher than Andre remembered. "I know you had no obligation to do so." Andre said nothing, waiting for him to continue. Reynolds swallowed. "Hit hard. I've been suspended pending a full investigation. My union says I have grounds to fight it, but after seeing that security footage..." He shook his head. "I looked like someone I don't recognize." "Sometimes it takes seeing ourselves through others' eyes to understand our own actions," Professor Washington observed quietly. Reynolds nodded reluctantly. "The things people are saying about me online in the news, they're calling me a racist. My kids can't even go to school without hearing about it." He looked directly at Andre for the first time. "I wanted to tell you face to face that I'm sorry. I made assumptions I had no right to make." Andre studied the man across from him. The apology seemed genuine, but something was still missing. "Officer Reynolds, do you understand exactly what you're apologizing for?" Reynolds blinked in confusion. "For detaining you without cause. For not recognizing your authority as the company owner." Andre shook his head. "That's not it. You're apologizing for a mistake of fact, not recognizing who I was. But the real issue was your mistake of assumption, believing I couldn't be who I said I was because of how I look. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. I never said anything about your race. You didn't have to, Andre replied calmly. It was evident in every interaction, every question, every doubt you expressed. Would you have detained a white pilot standing next to that same plane? The officer opened his mouth, then closed it again. After a long moment, he answered softly, "Probably not." Professor Washington nodded approvingly at his honesty. "That's the first step," Andre said, recognizing that we all carry biases, often unconscious ones, that affect our judgment. The question is what we do with that recognition. Reynolds looked defeated. "What does it matter now? My career is over." "That depends," Andre replied, "on what you want to happen next." Reynolds looked up, confusion evident on his face. "What do you mean?" Andre leaned forward. "I've proposed something to Director Collins and the airport board. A comprehensive training program on bias recognition and prevention for all security personnel. It's already been approved." "That's good," Reynolds said cautiously. "Here's my offer," Andre continued. "Instead of being fired, you become part of the solution. Work with Professor Washington. Help develop the training program, using your experience as a case study. Share what you've learned with your colleagues. Turn this mistake into something that prevents others from making the same one." Reynolds stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you do that? After what I put you through?" "Because firing you changes nothing in the system," Andre said simply. "One person loses their job, the airport issues an apology, and in 6 months another officer does the same thing to another pilot who doesn't have my resources or position. I'm more interested in lasting change than momentary justice." Professor Washington smiled approvingly. "Restorative justice rather than punitive justice. It's an approach more organizations should consider." Reynolds looked between them, still processing the unexpected offer. "And the airport board agreed to this?" "Conditionally," Andre replied. "It depends on your genuine commitment to the program. And on one other thing." "What's that?" "My company still hasn't decided about the airport expansion. That decision will depend partly on how seriously Westridge takes this training initiative." Understanding dawned on Reynolds' face. "So my participation affects whether the airport gets the contract." Andre nodded. "Your actions cost the airport my trust. Your commitment might help restore it." Reynolds sat back, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what to say. This isn't what I expected." "Sometimes the hardest punishment is being given a second chance," Andre said quietly, "because then you have to prove it was deserved." As their unusual meeting concluded, Andre felt cautiously optimistic. He had no illusions that one conversation could undo years of ingrained bias or systemic problems. But it was a start, one that might eventually lead to the day when a pilot wouldn't be judged by their skin color before their skills. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. As Andre walked across the tarmac toward his waiting jet, he noticed how airport staff regarded him differently now, some with admiration, others with newfound respect, a few with lingering discomfort. Change would take time, but at least the conversation had begun. He glanced back at the terminal building where Officer Reynolds stood watching his departure. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the distance. Reynolds gave a small, solemn nod. Not friendship, not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement. A first step. Andre returned the nod before climbing the stairs to his aircraft. He had a company to run, flights to oversee, and now, unexpectedly, a training program to help develop. It wasn't justice in the way most would define it, but perhaps it was something better, the beginning of progress. 6 months later, Andre stood at the podium in the Westridge Airport Training Center, looking out at the faces of 30 newly hired security officers. Beside him stood Professor Washington and, somewhat surprisingly, Officer Reynolds, now working as a training coordinator rather than on active security duty. "Welcome to your first day of bias awareness and prevention training," Andre began. "My name is Andre Wilson. I'm the CEO of Skypath Aviation. I'm also the pilot who was wrongfully detained in this very airport half a year ago." The new officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The incident had become something of a legend at Westridge, a cautionary tale about the consequences of unchecked bias. "I'm not here to make you feel guilty or uncomfortable," Andre continued, noting their reactions. I'm here because what happened that day created an opportunity for positive change. And you're part of that change. He stepped away from the podium, preferring to walk casually along the front of the room as he spoke. Before I turn things over to Professor Washington and Officer Reynolds, I want to share something with you. When I started flying 20 years ago, I knew I'd face challenges that other pilots wouldn't. Not because of my skills or qualifications, but because I didn't look like what many people expect a pilot to look like. Andre paused, making eye contact with several of the trainees. Every one of you will have moments in your career when you'll need to decide whether to act on your first impression or to question it. Those decisions will define not just who you are as security officers, but who we are as a community. As Andre concluded his introduction, he gestured for Reynolds to take over. The former security officer stepped forward, visibly nervous but determined. Over the past months, Andre had watched Reynolds transform from a defensive, resentful man to someone genuinely committed to learning and growth. It hadn't been easy for either of them. 6 months ago, I made the worst mistake of my career, Reynolds began, his voice steady, despite his obvious discomfort. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened that day, what I was thinking, and where I went wrong. Not because I enjoy reliving it, but because I hope my experience might prevent someone else from making the same mistake. Andre slipped quietly into a seat at the back of the room as Reynolds continued. The story sounded different from Reynolds' perspective. The split-second judgments, the self-reinforcing assumptions, the way bias had clouded his perception without him even realizing it. When Reynolds finished his account, Professor Washington took over, guiding the group through exercises designed to reveal unconscious biases. Andre had helped develop this curriculum, drawing on his own experiences not just from the detention incident, but from a lifetime of navigating spaces where he was often the only black person in the room. After the training session concluded, Andre met briefly with Director Collins in his office overlooking the tarmac. Through the window, they could see construction equipment where SkyPath's new maintenance hangar was being built. Tangible evidence that Andre had ultimately approved the airport expansion. The program's going well, Collins said, pouring coffee for both of them. Initial feedback from staff has been positive. Even the skeptics are coming around. Andre nodded. Reynolds has been surprisingly effective. His willingness to be vulnerable about his mistakes gives the training more impact. Never would have predicted that outcome, Collins admitted. To be honest, I thought you were making a mistake when you suggested keeping him on. It could have been, Andre acknowledged. But sometimes people just need the right opportunity to change. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Ms. Patel entered. Tablet in hand as always. Sorry to interrupt, but we need to leave soon if we're going to make the foundation launch on time, she reminded Andre. Right, Andre said, checking his watch. Director Collins, would you like to join us? It seems fitting given how this all started. An hour later, Andre stood before a different audience. A group of 30 high school students gathered in a community center near the airport. These teenagers, all from underrepresented backgrounds, were the first cohort of the SkyPath Future Aviators Foundation. When I was your age, Andre told them, I never saw pilots who looked like me. I never imagined that flying, let alone owning an aviation company, was something I could do. I'm here to tell you that it is. He gestured toward the instructors standing nearby, a diverse group of pilots, engineers, and aviation professionals who had volunteered to mentor the students. This program will provide flight training, aviation education, and mentorship to help you pursue careers in aviation. And it all started because of something negative that we managed to turn into something positive. Andre didn't share the full story of his detention with the students. That wasn't the point of today's event. Instead, he focused on the opportunities ahead of them. Each student would receive scholarship funding, hands-on experience, and professional guidance, resources that had been scarce when Andre was starting his own career. After his speech, as the students broke into smaller groups with their mentors, Andre found himself approached by a quiet girl with determined eyes. Mr. Wilson, she said, I have a question that's not really about flying. Go ahead, he encouraged. How do you deal with people who don't think you belong somewhere? Who look at you and decide you can't do something before they even know you? The question hit close to home. Andre considered his answer carefully. That's something I still deal with, he admitted. The trick isn't to never encounter those people because you will. The trick is to not let their limitations become yours. He glanced across the room, where Reynolds was awkwardly but earnestly helping a student understand a diagram of flight controls. And sometimes the people who underestimate you the most can become your unexpected allies if you give them the chance to learn better. The girl followed his gaze, curious but unaware of the history between Andre and the former officer. "Is that what happened with that guy?" Andre smiled. "It's a long story, but yes, that's part of it." As the Foundation launch event wound down, Andre found himself standing outside with Miss Patel, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "You know, when all this happened, I was ready to pull our investment from Westridge entirely," he confessed. "I was that angry," Miss Patel nodded. "I remember. No one would have blamed you. But then I realized that walking away might have felt good in the moment, but it wouldn't have changed anything. The next black pilot who landed here would have faced the same biases, the same assumptions. And now," Andre gestured toward the training center where they'd spent the morning, "now we have mandatory bias training for all security personnel. We have the Foundation providing opportunities to kids who might never have considered aviation careers. We have Reynolds, of all people, becoming an advocate for change. All because you chose a harder path than simple retribution," Miss Patel observed. "I wouldn't say I forgave him exactly," Andre clarified. "It's more that I saw an opportunity for something better than forgiveness." Later that evening, Andre found himself back in the cockpit of his private jet, preparing for a short flight to the company's headquarters. This was where he felt most at home, surrounded by instruments and gauges, the hum of the engines a comforting background to his thoughts. As he went through his pre-flight checks, he glanced out the window and noticed a group of the Foundation students watching from the observation deck. One of them, the girl he had spoken with earlier, waved enthusiastically. Andre waved back, remembering how rarely he had seen pilots who looked like him when he was her age. The radio crackled. "Skypath 379er, this is Westridge Tower. You're cleared for takeoff on runway 27. "Roger. Westridge Tower. Skypath 379er cleared for takeoff." As the jet gathered speed down the runway, Andre reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. What had begun as one of the most humiliating experiences of his career had somehow transformed into an engine for change, not just for him or for Reynolds or even for Westridge Airport, but potentially for an entire new generation of aviation professionals. The plane lifted smoothly into the evening sky. Below, the airport grew smaller, the scope of Andre's vision growing larger with each passing moment. He couldn't undo what had happened that day 6 months ago. No amount of training or programs or scholarships could erase the sting of being judged by the color of his skin, rather than the content of his character. But he could use that experience to build something new. He could take the pain of that moment and transform it into opportunity for others. And in doing so, perhaps he could help create a world where future pilots wouldn't have to face the same obstacles he had encountered. As the jet leveled off at cruising altitude, Andre thought about the students he had met today. In their eyes, he had seen something powerful. Not just hope or ambition, but the conviction that they belonged in the sky just as much as anyone else. That was the real victory, he realized. Not changing one officer's mind, or implementing one training program, or even building one foundation. The real victory was in showing those kids that they had every right to fly as high as their dreams could take them, and no one, no matter how biased or misguided, could keep them grounded if they refused to surrender that right. In the soft glow of the cockpit lights, Andre smiled to himself. His mother had always told him that true success wasn't just about climbing the ladder yourself, but about building new ladders for others to climb. Looking back at the airport receding in the distance, he could see those new ladders taking shape. It wasn't the ending he would have chosen for his story. It was something better, a new beginning not just for him but for all those who would come after.